Back in the 90s, there was a whole slew of Christian end-time rapture movies that all came out, and they were all really bad. But there was one that set itself aside and was different. Yes, it was really bad, but it was also oddly interesting. What made this film oddly interesting?
You'll watch your bowels spill out of you as Judas did when he betrayed his master.
Welcome to Durbania. I'm Durbin, and this is my spoiler talk review for The Omega Code. Now, The Omega Code is probably a movie you've never seen, and it's also probably a movie you've never heard of. So you should stick around for the spoiler talk for this, because this movie is oddly interesting. It came out in the 90s. And yes, it was a Christian end times movie, but there was something about this one that set itself apart from the other ones that were coming out during this time.
If fate assigns us our roles and we don't fulfill them, are we damned for it?
I remember being a young teenager seeing this movie, and I really liked it. I mean, it definitely has some of the Christian cheesiness. It isn't the best as a film, but they definitely made some choices with this movie that were very different than other Christian end-time movies that were coming out, and I think that's what sets this movie apart, and that's why I'm giving it a C-. Now, that's borderline below average, and I'm putting it right there at the average thing because of what makes this movie oddly interesting. So when this thing first came out, you got to think about the time. It was the end of the 90s. Y2K! Everybody was buying toilet paper off the shelves and stockpiling it in their house. Seriously? We need to go back to Demolition Man and study the 3 seashells and figure out how those things work.
He doesn't know how to use the 3 seashells.
Because that's got to be more economical than all the toilet paper disappearing off the shelves and filling up people's basements.
So much for the seashells. See you in a few minutes.
But it was coming out during that time. There was, the dawn of a new millennium. There was such a renewed interest in biblical end times. To get some of the negatives out of the way and why it's at a C- and not somewhere higher, because one thing that it decided to do was it was going to tell this story in one film. So this is not like Left Behind, where the one film is setting up the franchise and the sequels. It decided it was going to tell the whole story in one single movie. Now, it did end up getting a sequel called The Omega Code 2 Megiddo, but it really wasn't a sequel. It was more of it's not even a reboot. It was really a redo. It's like they just decided to remake the first one again.
No one can defeat me!
And it really was so radically different. It was its own unique thing unto itself. But the Omega Code is fascinating to me. It's a fascinating study to get into. So what makes it bad is the fact that it was trying to tell this entire end time story in one film. And this one film is only an hour and a half long. So it's a short film, and it doesn't give itself a lot of time to tell the story. But it's a short film and doesn't give itself a lot of time to tell the story because it did not have the biggest budget to tell like a 2-3 hour epic like Dune and really get into this. And so what this movie ends up doing is it does a lot of telling and not a lot of showing. So here we are dealing with end times, and end time things are going on all around, and a lot of that gets described in news cycle montages. So they would skip to the news when they want to transition to something else in the film and kind of catch us, the audience, up on what's going on in the world. So when you're watching a movie, you want to show and not tell, because what you want to do is bring the audience in to what's going on. When you're doing a lot of telling and not showing, it's like, you're telling me what I'm supposed to feel, but should I just be feeling it? And so it feels like that's what this movie does a lot, because it's trying to transition to the next thing to get as much of this story out as they can in this short time. Now, to really get into this, I gotta tell you what the Bible Code is. So the Bible Code is this idea that you go back to the Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible, and you go back to the original language. And back when I was a kid, my parents watched TBN all the time, the Trinity Broadcasting Network, and so because they watched it all the time, I ended up watching it all the time. And one of the things that got really popular on TBN that they kept bringing up and having guests in to talk about was the Bible Code. So if you go back to the Torah in its original language, and for instance, you go every 6 letters from right to left, those 6 letters will spell out a word. If you go diagonally upwards on the page, counting every 12 letters, kind of like a crossword puzzle, well then, oh my gosh, we're spelling out another word. So you can keep doing patterns like this and spell out phrases that maybe talk about the Kennedy assassination or prophesy something happening in the future.
Another example, the computer found Princess and Diana, encoded at the same skip distance. And around it, Paris. Tunnel.
So this was a thing that they were really talking about all the time on TBN, and the Omega Code was TBN's first film that they produced. So of course, the Bible Code became the plot device of the Omega Code. So this is where my first positive about this movie that kind of sets it apart from the others. What's interesting to me is how they use the Bible Code. So the plot of the Omega Code is this. This rabbi finds this key and it unlocks the Bible Code completely so they could just decode everything. So the Antichrist has this rabbi killed. So once he's killed, the Antichrist, Stone Alexander, gets a hold of the Bible Code. Now, instead of trying to destroy the Bible Code or to know what the codes say to work around it, no, he follows these hidden biblical prophecies to become the beast.
And it's prophesied that the world will lay at your feet.
And it's interesting because on the one hand, that just shows the arrogance of Satan in a way. Like his arrogance is put on full display, that he really thinks he could win. He really thinks that he can take God's throne. So it's kind of like showcasing the self-deception that the devil operates under all the time. And that's something that I found intriguing. Now, one thing is this is a Christian film and it's made by Christians. So even when they're doing the codes are not like any weird new agey messages or anything that contradicts what the Bible says. In fact, if you pay attention to what the codes are, yes, some are kind of fantasy to carry the plot on, but most of them are verses out of the book of Daniel and out of the book of Revelation, apocalyptic books, and they're just sort of rewording it a little bit, not to go against it, but to make it sound kind of like a riddle, something that Nostradamus, I can't say his name, you know who I'm talking about, something that he would write.
From 10 horns he will rise, an empire built on stone. All bow before the beast and his prophet.
Another plot that we have is this idea that there are angels and demons battling over our soul. And the way they express this is through Casper Van Dien's character, Gillen Lane. So Gillen Lane is this motivational guru. And he's got vision, and he knows how to cast vision. So all of his self-help books sell out. Wherever he goes to speak, thousands of people flock to hear him. He's like a rock star of the self-help world. And this is why Stone Alexander is desperate to have Lane work for him, because Lane is a man of vision. But Lane is also a man plagued by visions. And so he's having all these weird and crazy visions, and through these visions, this is how we're supposed to see illustrated to us that there are angels and demons, light and dark, battling over our soul. One of the ways we see it is kind of Lane's character arc. The way this movie opens, you know, he is famous, he gets a crowd wherever he goes, but for him it's all about the greater good. He wants to make an impact on the world and constantly serve the greater good. But the price of that is his marriage is falling apart. He has a little girl, their family is falling apart. And so he realizes this at the beginning. He doesn't know how to fix it. But what I like is you see that he wants to fix it.
And I know the worth of a real man will show in the countenance of his wife's face.
And so he goes home, gives up that life, and tries to become like a college professor locally just to try to fix his family. But you can see like he's still pulled by that other world. So one way we see the battle of light and dark for his soul is how you have Stone Alexander, who is the Antichrist, literally being the serpent in the garden, tempting him with fruit. It just looks too good to turn down.
Family, or the greater good.
And that fruit is to come travel with Stone, to make a real difference in the world, to unite the world in peace like it's never been before. This is everything that Lane has always wanted and always wanted to do. And so it lures him away from his family. Now, part of this is Stone uncovered a prophecy in the Bible code that said single Lane leads the way. What I like about this is how it is an illustration of how the devil will rip apart a family. The greater good is for Gillen Lane to be with his wife and his daughter and to build his family and to keep them together. So the devil is tempting him with something that is not the greater good to pull him away from the true greater good. And it's just really interesting how he gets in there to destroy this man's family so that single Lane could lead the way for him.
And I know the worth of a real man will show in the countenance of his wife's face.
You and I, we have a higher calling.
So that's one way we see that battle of light and dark. Now, the visions, this is kind of interesting to me because they do a bad job with the visions for the most part. For instance, the first time we ever experience Gillen Lane having a weird vision is he's with Stone Alexander at an event. I think it's at Stone's Castle, but I'm not entirely sure. He walks up to this white horse to pet it, and all of a sudden this weird effect happens with the camera, and the horse changes collars and makes weird noises and cuts to the next scene. As a teenager, I saw this movie multiple times on the big screen because I was just excited to have a Christian film on the big screen. And I went, what an odd transition. They must be trying to be the cool Christian end times movie with cool transitions like that. No, I was such a nerd. I bought the novelization of the film and I read that. Turns out that was vision number one. Yeah, when he came up to that white horse, he actually had a vision of the 4 horses of the apocalypse while he was standing there with Stone Alexander, the Antichrist. The concept is freaking awesome. The execution was not. Because it doesn't have this moment where Lane pulls away and goes, did anybody else see that? What was that? And nobody else is reacting, like only he saw that. Like, they don't have a moment like that, so it's like, what just happened? So that part is kind of sad because this is a repeated pattern I see in the movie. What a fantastic idea. Wow, that execution isn't quite there. So we're seeing that he can see demons and like he's seeing them in visions. One way they're battling for his soul is, you know, he gets caught in this vortex in his mind and is brought to his mother's death when his mother is killed by a drunk driver. It's like the demons are trying to imprison him in that pain and in that moment. But then there's these moments where like he gets this vision from God and it leads him to the truth. But that's also really confusing because he gets this vision from God, but then he's up and he's washing his face and this like demon appears in the mirror and he doesn't even react to it. Again, this is a moment of a great concept with a poor execution, but the vision that God gave him led him to see how Stone was using the Bible code not to better the world, but for his own selfish ambition, and he was killing thousands of people to get what he wanted. So when Lane discovers this truth, obviously now he's got to escape the Antichrist compound, so he runs and the front gate is wide open and he runs through it. The soldiers of the Antichrist are coming after him, they get to the front gate and it's shut. Now, as a kid, I didn't really give that much of a second thought. I read the novelization and I went, oh, you're telling me an angel opened the gate to let Lane out and then shut the gate on the soldiers so that the soldiers couldn't get out. That is what that scene represents. So through Gillen Lane, we see the concept of angels and demons, light and dark, battling for his soul. The idea is there and the concept is so good and very interesting. The execution just wasn't quite what it needed to be to make that clear and to like fully immerse you in the experience. But then I like the ending of Lane's journey because they have this great character arc for him. Because now he starts to swing back. Like once he understands who the Antichrist is, once he understands about the Bible code, this was a guy who did not like religion at all. He thought it was myth and not real. But as he's seeing the reality of it and working side by side with the Antichrist, seeing Bible code prophecies come true, his own words that he spoke were encoded in there, things like that begin to work on him. And by the time you get to the end of the movie, he's been captured by the Antichrist. He's in this little dungeon in Stone Alexander's castle. Dominic, who is Stone Alexander's right-hand man, has just beat the tar out of him. But then all of a sudden, he's alone, and you hear the screams of demons. I actually like this concept because this is Lane's come to Jesus moment because it really brings us down to this. Is he going to call out to Jesus and be saved, or is he going to be consumed by the demons? Like, this is where the battle reaches the end and something's gonna happen one way or the other with Gillen Lane. And so these demons start to swirl around him, and it's kind of like these ropes or these chains, and he like falls to the ground, and as he falls to the ground, something interesting happens. Now, let me go back to other 90s Christian movie where they have these come to Jesus moments. I feel like they always have to do it where they say the sinner's prayer. In other words, when the guy has the come to Jesus moment, they try to make it emotional, but really the big goal is to say a prayer that the viewer can repeat with the character. And so it kind of takes you out of the moment and it takes you out of the situation because it gets rid of the authenticity of watching this character have a real experience. And what I like about this scene, as much as it does look kind of cheap as you're watching it, is as Lane is brought to the ground by these demons, he just looks up and he says,
God, Jesus, save me.
And it goes from noise, loudness, demons everywhere to they're gone and it's quiet. To me, that speaks volumes. Because in Acts it says there is no other name by which we can be saved. So he called out to that name Jesus and he was saved. That was it. It was like a true experiential moment with this character. And he said and he's not religious, so he said the only words he knew to say, and boom, he couldn't fight this battle anymore because he can never win. So he surrendered. But all of that didn't have to be preached and yelled at you. No, you get it in that moment where he just says the name.
Jesus, save me.
And the name sends the demons running because it wasn't just him saying the name, he actually called out to Jesus. And so it was this really cool scene that I don't think is as cheesy as it has been in other movies. But if I'm gonna be honest, what truly makes this movie oddly interesting to me is how they portray the Antichrist, Stone Alexander.
Alexander.
So let me say this, Michael York plays the Antichrist in this. And I kind of like Michael York. And overall, he does a great job as Stone Alexander. He really does. The problem that I have is, when you're doing a stage play, you want to be big, because you want to bring in the people in the last row into the emotion of what's going on. When you're doing a film, you got to be subtle, because the camera is right there. So whenever Michael York does subtlety, and he's subtle with his character, it's menacing and it's good because he is a great actor and he brings a real Shakespearean quality to it. But then there's these moments where he gets really big, but because it's a film and the camera's right there, it takes the character and makes it more cartoony. So there's moments like that in this movie where it kind of goes back and forth for me, but otherwise, I do like Michael York in this role. But the most interesting thing about this character is there are some really interesting moments of good writing kind of exploring who Stone Alexander is. The first moment is right here.
If fate assigns us our roles and we don't fulfill them, are we damned for it?
What I love about that is it feels like Stone Alexander is having a moment of doubt. He's having a moment of fear. He comes up to Dominic and he's saying, would I be damned for my obedience?
If Adolf Hitler was assigned his role and he played it out perfectly to the end, was he damned for his obedience?
I mean, that's a real human struggle. And it's interesting because I have my own thoughts on that. God has given us free will. Did Stone have to go down this path? I don't think so. God has given us free will. But it's a real good and interesting human question in this moment where it feels like the human part of Stone is trapped. And now he's asking this question. And I think what really feeds into this scene is what happens next.
He said I would be the prophet.
This comes from Revelation 13, where it's describing this beast with 7 heads. One of the heads appeared to have a fatal wound. The fatal wound was miraculously healed, and the world marveled and followed the beast. So the common interpretation of that is the Antichrist is trying to do his own resurrection to mimic Jesus and to get the whole world to follow him, because that's all the devil is. He is a counterfeit. He's not an equal to God. He can't create his own thing. All he can do is take what is created and try to twist it and pervert it. So the point is suddenly then the devil fully possesses the body of Stone Alexander as it rises from the dead. You know it's a possession because of this one code that says like the sepulcher reoccupied. So it's giving us the signal that the body is now reoccupied by Satan himself. And so when he comes back, there's a bit more of a confidence than there was in the scene prior.
You'll watch your bowels spill out of you as Judas did when he betrayed his master.
But what's interesting is Stone and Dominic have a talk, and you see in this talk there is still some of the human left. So what you really end up getting from this conversation is this fascinating backstory that Stone has been driven by these tormenting voices.
Well, I couldn't think straight. The blood was still on my hands and the voices were
And so as these voices drive him and torment him, they led him to kill his father somehow. So the blood was on his hands, and he stumbles into Dominic's confessional booth because Dominic, I guess, was once a priest and he gave that up. That's a whole backstory that would be interesting to get into a little bit more, to understand these characters a little bit better. But now that he was killed and risen, he's not hearing those tormenting voices. It's a singular thought. In other words, it's a thought coming from one singular person. He closes his eyes and these thoughts fill his mind.
More powerful than singular, yes, as if whoever it is has me at his complete mercy and painful.
So it's not the voices, it's thoughts. But then he talks about how the thoughts are painful, but they're sweet. It's like this really weird thing. But it's interesting because it gives us backstory, but it's frustrating because this should have been the freaking movie. The freaking movie, we should have seen Stone's character arc. We should have seen him dealing with these voices and that tormenting thing that they have over him. We should have seen that. We should have experienced that. So that by the time we get to this moment where he resurrects and he's having this conversation with Dominic, it means something more to us to understand. It's not voices anymore. It's thoughts coming from something singular, which also shows, does he have an understanding of what has taken him over? Does he have an understanding of what has fully possessed him? Now, these are questions that I find interesting that I wish this movie dove into, but it did not. It just touched on it and didn't go deeper. But this is the kind of thing that I thought was oddly fascinating, and the fact that they even went here a little bit is more than any other 90s end-time Christian movie has done, and I found it more interesting than any of those other movies, and it's why it puts this at this average grade for me. The other thing about this movie that I think really sets it apart from other of those end-time movies that were coming out around this time is the two prophets. So these are very interesting characters. I like that they aren't given names, so it leaves them in this area of mystery. What I like about them is anytime they're interacting with our main characters, I find them incredibly interesting. But things like this drive me up a frickin' wall.
The mysterious prophets continue to stir up trouble in Jerusalem, claiming God has given them the power to shut up the heavens.
Now, Revelation 11 talks about these prophets and how they have this ability to shut up the heavens. They could turn the water into blood. Anybody who goes to harm them, fire proceeds from them and destroys them. Like, these are fascinating characters. Now, what did that news report do? The news report told us that they are causing trouble, that they've shut up the heavens. But what did it show us? It showed us two old men teaching and a crowd of people politely listening. It's telling us one thing and it's showing us another, so it kind of undercuts the power of who these characters are. But then in those moments where it's one-on-one with the main characters, I'm like, this is cool. But the best moment is at the end when you have the Antichrist. He's in the Solomon's temple rebuilt and he has declared himself God, and something happens.
When you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel standing in the holy place.
Whew, I'm telling you. I am telling you, this scene is awesome. When I was a kid, I loved it. Now that I'm a grown up and I rewatched it, but I really like it, and I think it's just so well done. It is this confrontation between the two prophets and the Antichrist. He's trying to set himself up as God and declare that he is God.
I have become king and God!
But then the prophets of God actually step on the scene, and man, they hold nothing back.
How you have fallen from heaven, Lucifer, son of the morning. How you are cut to the ground.
What's really cool about this is the Antichrist, his side of the speech, as he's boasting and proclaiming himself God, he's quoting Isaiah 14, talking about how he will ascend to heaven.
For I have said in my heart, I will ascend to heaven. I will raise my throne above the stars of God.
And then in come the two prophets, and they quote Isaiah 14.
How you have fallen from heaven, Lucifer, son of the morning. How you are cut to the ground.
The way that it's done, I just really have always enjoyed this confrontation. I have found it to be such an intense scene. Revelation 11 says that the two prophets are killed, and their bodies are thrown out into the street, and then 3.5 days later, God resurrects the prophets So we get to see a picture of a true resurrection from the true giver of life.
Destroy these temples of his holy prophets, and the Lord will rebuild them in 3 days.
And then the two prophets ascend into heaven in full view of everybody. Stone shoots the prophets, they fall dead, and 3.5 days later, they do come back. The cool part is the prophets are laying on the ground, the blood is pulled and dried around them, but then it re-liquefies and goes back into their bodies. This cloud wraps around them, and they stand up. You would think any good end-time Christian film would build to the second coming of Jesus. But back in the day, man, I used to get so frustrated. Like, there'd be these different series of end-time movies, but they would never get to an ending. They would never have a concluding film that has the second coming of Jesus, probably because it's so hard to do. And so that was something that I really liked about the Omega Code, because it shows us the second coming. It shows us the moment of Jesus returning. Now, how do you portray that? It's difficult. So what you have is this intense scene where Stone Alexander has these jets on their way to Jerusalem. They're going to nuke it. Gillen Lane shows up with a gun, and he's trying to pull Stone back and say, do not send the troops. And Stone is like, yeah, I'm sending the troops. Okay, we're blowing it up. 3, 2, and... I like it, because at first, it's kind of a fake out. Oh my gosh, did he succeed? Did he just blow up Jerusalem? But that's not what happened. That explosion of light is the second coming of Jesus. And that light comes and destroys him. It's kind of an epic scene that doesn't look great, but we gotta forgive it again because it's the 90s. So this light comes through like Stone's castle, and it hits Stone, and the devil comes out of Stone and grabs a hold of his shoulders like it's trying to claw its way back in and repossess him. But the light is just pummeling him until finally he just fades away and blows away in it, and then the bullet wound reappears on Stone's head, and he just falls down dead. And so it's kind of this unique interpretation, and of course they have to do it kind of unique because, you know, they don't have the budget to go into everything that's in Revelation 19 and all of that stuff. But it's still kind of epic in its own way, and you can tell they saved a lot of their budget to pull this moment off, where you have this glory cloud wrapping around the whole earth as Jesus returns and sets up his kingdom on earth. And then, of course, there we get the reveal of the final code, which is 4 zeros, dawn of a new millennium, and then it ends. The thing that kind of sucks about it ending right there is we have all this stuff where Lane had this character arc of wanting to get back with his family, and you have these scenes where he sees his family again. They're in all kinds of trouble because of what, you know, he's going against the Antichrist now and all of that stuff. So you have these moments, and it would have been nice to see Lane go home to his family in the Millennial Kingdom. So instead of the final shot being the final code, dawn of a new millennium, it would have been cool if, like, you had this green summertime shot, and maybe you had his wife standing out on the porch, taken in the air, and then she looks up, and there he is coming home to her, just to give us that closure between Lane and his family, and to maybe complete that arc. I wish we had that completion of that arc, and we don't. It just ends on that shot of the final code, but whatever. This movie still had enough that even to this day, when I watch it, and compared to other Christian end-time things I've even seen since then, because this movie kind of took some unique angles on things, it stands out to me above other Christian end-time movies. And it's one of the reasons I'd say, is it the best? No. But do I recommend it? Yeah. It's on Amazon Prime. That's where I found it and rewatched it. Kind of renewed my interest to even talk about it. So I find it kind of an interesting film. I think the Omega Code is an interesting one to check out. The best? No, but none of them are. But it's definitely one that is oddly interesting, and I think stands out from some of those other ones that have come out. So if you have seen the Omega Code, I'm curious to know your thoughts. And if you haven't, would you like to check it out now? Hit that subscribe button to become a Durbanian. Hit the bell by the subscribe button so you're notified for my next movie review, ranking video, theological analysis, or anything else that I do here. I'd also love to hear from you. Would you want me to talk about the Omega Code 2, Megiddo, which is not a sequel, but it's a do-over? Or would you like me to dive into something like Left Behind? Let's talk about that in the comments. I'm Durbin. Thanks for checking out Durbania.